Do you think silence in a family says more than shouting?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? Yesterday, my sister turned my engagement party into her personal announcement stage, and today, every single mailbox in our family received something that made her explode. But to explain how we got there, I need to start with what happened in that room when I realized she had no intention of letting me have a single moment that was mine. The party was meant to be about Ethan and me finally celebrating with our families, because after months of planning, juggling budgets, and choosing a date that worked for everyone, we finally had the chance to enjoy the idea of being engaged without constant stress. The drinks were poured, the food was set out, and for a little while, people were actually focused on us, asking about the venue, the proposal story, and all those small details that couples repeat 100 times. I was smiling, Ethan was relaxed, and for a moment it really felt like the evening would stay on track. But then Jenna tapped her glass. She looked around the room with that practiced smirk she uses when she knows she's about to pull focus, and with the fakest apology I have ever heard, she said, "Sorry if I overshadow you, but I'm expecting two." The room broke into applause and laughter, and in the space of a few seconds, my engagement party turned into Jenna's pregnancy reveal. Some people actually stood up and clapped, others rushed over to hug her, and suddenly Ethan and I were left sitting there like side characters in our own story. It wasn't just the words she used, it was the way she paused, waiting for the attention to shift, watching me like she wanted to see how I'd handle it. Now, I know people will say, "But a baby is big news," and yes, it is, but this wasn't about a baby, it was about timing, and if you knew Jenna the way I do, you'd know she has a long history of hijacking moments. When I graduated college, she announced her engagement during the family dinner. When I got my first big promotion, she showed up in the same restaurant with a new car and insisted everyone go outside to admire it. When I had surgery a few years ago, she posted about being so stressed because she thought she was pregnant then too, which wasn't even true. That's Jenna. She has to redirect every spotlight back onto herself. I wasn't going to let her do it this time, not without consequences. I stood up, smiled, and took the microphone back. My voice was calm, maybe calmer than it should have been, but I said, "Congratulations, Jenna, that's wonderful news. Tonight we're celebrating our engagement, and we'll celebrate your big announcement soon, because both deserve their own space." I could see the room split instantly. Some people nodded, others shifted uncomfortably, and Jenna gave me this look like I'd just broken some unspoken family law. But I wasn't angry. I was done being quiet about her pattern. The rest of the night was awkward. My parents rushed to smooth things over, muttering that Jenna didn't mean any harm and that I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, silently telling me he was with me no matter what. I smiled, I cut the cake, I did all the things expected of me, but inside, I was already planning my response. Because here's the thing, Jenna thrives on chaos, and she expects me to either explode and look dramatic or stay silent and look weak. I wasn't going to give her either. I was going to beat her with strategy. That night, when the guests were gone and the dishes were being cleaned, I opened the family group chat, posted one of the happy photos from earlier, and wrote, "Thank you all for celebrating with us. We'll celebrate Jenna's wonderful news soon. For wedding updates, please use our new RSVP site. I'll be sending out personal codes." It looked polite, almost boring, but it was the start of a new rule. From now on, information about my wedding would flow only through channels I controlled. No public Facebook posts, no chance for her to hijack, no open-ended drama. Just codes, lists, and receipts. Jenna saw it instantly. She replied with a thumbs up, but I know her well enough to recognize the silence behind that emoji wasn't agreement. It was the pause before she figured out how to flip this on me. I went to bed knowing the next day would bring fallout, but I wasn't worried. Ethan and I had already mailed our save the dates weeks ago, and I knew exactly when they would hit everyone's mailbox. The timing wasn't intentional revenge, but the effect would be explosive, because the day after she hijacked my engagement party to make it about her, every relative, every friend, and every neighbor would be holding an envelope with our names on it and our date in bold letters. And that's exactly what happened. The next morning, my phone lit up with group chat notifications. Pictures of our save the dates started popping up, people posting excited messages, aunts saying they couldn't wait, cousins asking about travel. For the first time in months, the attention was back where it belonged, and Jenna lost it. She wrote, "Wow, so you timed this to bury my news? Real classy." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The save the dates spoke for themselves. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to defend my wedding from her drama. I was going to design a system that made it impossible for her to hijack anything again. She wanted chaos. I was giving her rules. She wanted to play victim. I was giving her boundaries. And if she thought the save the dates were an attack, she hadn't seen anything yet, because what I was about to put in motion would make her realize this wedding wasn't just another event she could steal. This was going to be the one moment where her games finally failed. Would you have done the same in my place, or would you have just stayed quiet and let her win again? Because for me, staying quiet was no longer an option. This time, I was going to take control, and I was going to do it in a way that no one could argue with, not even her. The morning after Jenna's meltdown in the family chat, when our save the dates had landed in every mailbox and she was busy accusing me of deliberately burying her pregnancy announcement, I woke up with a sense of calm that I had not felt in a long time. Because for once I was no longer reacting to her chaos, I was setting the terms. Ethan and I sat at our kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold while we talked through the next steps, and the more we laid it out, the clearer it became that if I wanted to survive the months leading to our wedding without being dragged into her constant spotlight stealing, I had to move every single part of this event onto firm, controlled ground. It wasn't enough to say, "Don't hijack my moment," because Jenna thrived in the gray areas, the unspoken rules, the messy spaces where people hesitated to push back. So I decided right then that the only way forward was contracts, deposits, exclusivity clauses, and rules that sounded polite on paper but came with teeth when tested. The first battle was money, because my parents had offered to help with wedding costs in the beginning, but as soon as Jenna made her announcement, they started hinting that the family budget was stretched and maybe Ethan and I should scale back so there would be enough left for baby expenses, which to me sounded like an indirect way of saying that my wedding was suddenly negotiable while her pregnancy was sacred. Instead of fighting with them about fairness, Ethan and I quietly shifted gears. We chose a venue that allowed installment payments, signed a contract that gave us more control, and brought on a planner named Riley who had no patience for drama and understood that when clients said exclusive, they meant exclusive. Riley inserted language into every vendor contract stating that once a deposit was paid, no member of our family could book those vendors for overlapping dates or events that would conflict with our wedding, which was exactly the kind of airtight protection I needed, because I knew Jenna would eventually try to piggyback on our florist, our DJ, or even our bakery, just to blur the lines and pull attention back to herself. At the same time, I needed to solve the microphone problem, because if you have ever seen Jenna at an event, you know that all she needs is 30 seconds and a mic to turn anything into her stage. I sat with Riley and DJ Marco, and together we wrote a clause into the entertainment agreement that stated microphones would only be live for names on an approved list, with Riley or Marco holding the power to cut audio instantly if someone tried to sneak in. It sounded ridiculous, maybe even controlling, but the truth is that I had watched Jenna crash events with a champagne toast that turned into a 10-minute monologue about her own life, and I refused to stand at my own reception while guests politely clapped for her instead of celebrating us. The next step was information control, because the save the dates had shown me how quickly the narrative could shift just by controlling timing. I created an RSVP site that required personalized codes, which I sent individually by text message, making it clear that this was the only channel for updates, and within that site I included one short but firm note. No surprise announcements will be permitted at the wedding. If you would like a special mention, please request it in advance. To most people it sounded like I was being inclusive and organized, but I knew exactly who that line was written for, and it was my way of telling Jenna that her habit of dropping bombs in the middle of events was finished. Of course, nothing stays quiet for long in my family, and within a week Jenna had already tested the boundaries. She told my parents that since the whole family would be in town for our rehearsal dinner, it would be convenient to schedule her gender reveal that same weekend, because then people wouldn't have to travel twice. My parents repeated her idea to me in that tentative voice they use when they are hoping I will agree to something I hate just to keep the peace, and for a moment I could see exactly how it would play out. Our rehearsal dinner would be cut short by pink or blue smoke bombs. Our relatives would leave talking about baby names instead of our vows, and once again I would be the background character in my own milestone. But instead of exploding or begging, I simply said, "No, we're not combining events," and left it at that. The look on their faces told me they weren't used to me drawing such a blunt line, but I had finally learned that saying no wasn't selfish, it was survival. That same evening, I sat down with Tasha, my maid of honor, who has a brain like a filing cabinet and no fear of confrontation, and together we made a spreadsheet mapping every date Jenna had already claimed for showers, doctor's appointments, and family dinners, then layered my wedding events over it like a strategy board. It felt ridiculous, like plotting troop movements, but it gave me peace of mind, because I could see in black and white where she might try to overlap, and I could block her before she even moved. Tasha promised to be my second pair of eyes, watching family chat for any signs of sabotage, and I felt lighter knowing someone else understood the game. The best part was that Ethan never once rolled his eyes or told me I was overreacting. He leaned in, reviewed contracts, double-checked vendor clauses, and told me, "You deserve a wedding that isn't shared with someone else's announcement." Hearing him say that reminded me why I wanted to marry him in the first place. Not because he fixes everything, but because he refuses to let me shrink myself to make others comfortable. By the end of that week, I had a venue, a planner, contracts with exclusivity, an RSVP system with codes, a no-mic policy, and a maid of honor running interference. It wasn't about controlling people out of paranoia. It was about finally refusing to be played like a side character. I wasn't preparing for a wedding anymore. I was preparing for battle, and the difference was that this time, the rules were mine. So when Jenna announced to the family group chat that she had officially booked her gender reveal for the same weekend as our rehearsal dinner, with balloons and fireworks and a rented hall, and added that it would make things easier since everyone would already be in town, I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I didn't even reply. Because she had just walked straight into the trap I had built without realizing it, and while she thought she was setting the stage to steal another spotlight, she was about to learn that every move she made now triggered consequences she couldn't talk her way out of. Would you have gone this far, or would you have trusted that people would eventually see through her? Because I knew waiting for people to see the truth had never worked before, and this time, I was done waiting. When Jenna blasted the group chat with her plan to stage a full gender reveal during this same weekend as our rehearsal, dressed up in that fake practicality about saving everyone a trip, I did not reply with a counterargument or an explanation because explanations are oxygen for her kind of drama, and instead I forwarded the message to Riley with one line that said, "Please activate what we discussed," which is how I learned that the protection you buy with clear contracts feels less like paperwork and more like a backbone you can lean on when the people closest to you start pretending your boundaries are optional. Riley moved faster than I expected, which I appreciated because speed is the one thing Jenna always counts on to keep people off balance, and within hours she had confirmed with the venue, the florist, the bakery, and the DJ that our exclusivity clauses were in effect from the rehearsal through the end of the wedding weekend, meaning no overlapping deliveries, no staff reassignments, and no soft exceptions just because someone claims to be family. So when Jenna tried to book the same florist for her reveal on our rehearsal night under the argument that the arrangements would already be made and she would just reuse a few pieces, the florist replied with a professional but firm statement referencing the contract language and the insurance implications of moving product to a non-contracted event, which seemed to surprise her because she clearly expected charm and pressure to win the day the way it usually does with small business owners who rely on goodwill and repeat customers. By lunchtime, the bakery had sent a similar response, using slightly warmer language about how they were honored to be part of our weekend and could not accommodate conflicting orders that might compromise quality or delivery schedules. And then Riley herself followed up with a short letter that was a masterclass in calm enforcement, laying out the dates, the covered hours, the liability coverage, and the escalation path if any third party attempted to alter or intercept services. Which is how the message finally landed that this wasn't about me being petty or jealous. It was about the basic reality that once money changes hands and signatures are on paper, the timeline belongs to the couple who signed, not to the sibling who is used to walking through doors other people opened. Predictably, Jenna pivoted to the one script she knows by heart, the one where she is wounded and I am cruel, telling our parents that I was punishing her for being pregnant and turning the family against her during what should be the happiest time of her life. And then she did what she always does when she feels a wall instead of a curtain. She took the fight public by dropping hints on social media about controlling brides and unsupportive sisters, which my aunt immediately screenshotted into the family chat with a comment about how sad it was to see us at odds and how she hoped both girls could share, a phrase that used to unravel me because it sounds reasonable until you realize that sharing only ever means I give and she takes. Instead of arguing with my aunt or trying to manage the optics, I called her directly and told her the truth in one long, even sentence that left no space for misinterpretation. That I wanted Jenna to have a beautiful celebration where she is the star and that I had already solved the problem in a way that protected my wedding and honored Jenna's news. Because two things can be important without being fused into one messy spectacle that leaves everyone resentful and exhausted. And then I told her what I had done and asked her to help me make it stick. What I had done, which felt like the cleanest kind of revenge because it removed her best argument and looked generous to anyone watching, was book and prepay a baby shower venue for a later weekend with a deposit that could not be transferred to my event under any circumstances, then put my mother's name on the host line so that she would feel included and proud instead of torn. And finally asked Tasha to coordinate with the venue so that Jenna would feel catered to without having access to any channel where she could reinterpret a courtesy into control, which is the move she always pulls when someone else organizes something on her behalf. When my mother found out the shower was already arranged and paid for, she sounded relieved in a way I had not heard since the party because the pressure she felt to merge events evaporated the moment there was an alternative she could point to. A concrete plan with a date and a place and a host whose name gave it legitimacy, and she immediately shifted from trying to talk me into accommodating Jenna to texting me about guest lists and whether the food should lean sweet or savory, which told me that the root problem was never that my parents loved her more, it was that they hate conflict and will believe almost any story that promises less of it. So my job was not to convince them with feelings, but to hand them a plan that makes the right choice easier than the wrong one. Of course, Jenna did not thank anyone for the shower because gratitude would look like surrender, and instead, she crafted a new angle where my prepaid venue was an attempt to control her narrative, which she announced to a cousin who redraws the truth for sport. And then she texted Ethan directly with a message that was meant to land like a warning, but felt more like a sloppy threat, saying that he should reconsider marrying into a family where the bride wages war on her pregnant sister and that if he wanted to escape the drama, she could help him, which he forwarded to me with a 2-word caption that said everything for record. And then he blocked her number without ceremony because the thing about calm men is that they do not enjoy being dragged into messes they did not create, and they will not pretend respect for people who treat boundaries as personal insults. I saved the screenshot in a folder labeled with dates and context because one lesson I have learned the hard way is that when people rewrite history, the person with receipts wins the quiet war. And then I closed the laptop and sat with the quiet satisfaction of realizing that I had turned a minefield into a map I could read, not because I wanted to punish her, but because my peace was worth protecting and my wedding deserved to be about the commitment I was making rather than the performance my sister wanted to stage. If you are wondering whether I called Jenna to confront her about the text, I did not, because confrontation is a gift to someone who feeds on attention. And the more effective consequence was to let her bounce off the structure I had built until she either respected it or exhausted herself. And while she was busy pushing on locked doors, I was already working with Riley on the next layer of protection. The one that would reveal who in the family was forwarding our plans to her and who truly had our backs, because the leak would show itself soon enough, and when it did, I intended to respond with process, not outrage. The week after Ethan blocked Jenna's number, I started to notice that details I had only shared through the RSVP system were surfacing in side conversations, which meant that someone with access to a code was screenshotting and passing information along to her. And instead of panicking or confronting the entire family with accusations, I leaned on the system I had built because I knew that trust without verification is just wishful thinking when you are dealing with someone who thrives on leaks and whispers. Every code was unique, every login created a digital footprint, and when I pulled the records with Riley's help, the pattern showed up quickly enough. One of my cousins, the one who prides himself on being the family diplomat, had shared a screenshot with Jenna, thinking he was smoothing things over, not realizing that in doing so he had handed her the ammunition she was desperate to find after her attempts with vendors had failed. I decided to test how far the leak would travel before I made a move, so I created a decoy update announcing a supposed shift in rehearsal timing to an afternoon slot, a detail that would be inconvenient for people traveling and would spread quickly if repeated. And sure enough, within 2 days, I overheard an aunt asking if she needed to adjust her hotel booking, which told me the false information had made its way through Jenna's channel. When I called her directly and clarified the real time, she admitted that she had seen a screenshot in Jenna's story thread, which was all the proof I needed to know the leak was live and active. Rather than blow it up in the chat or accuse anyone publicly, I used the consequence I had already prepared in advance. The system automatically downgraded that cousin's RSVP from special seating to general guest, which meant no microphone access, no position in the rehearsal lineup, and no chance of being pulled into any spotlight moments. The consequence was invisible to most people, but unmistakable to the person who lost privileges, and that is exactly how I wanted it. At the same time, Riley and I tightened the next layer of enforcement by working with the officiant, Linda, who had seen enough chaotic weddings to understand why I was being cautious. Together we agreed on a ceremony structure that eliminated any opportunity for surprise speeches or mid-vow interruptions, and then we layered in a phone-free rule that required guests to seal their devices in small pouches at the door, which removed the possibility of someone live streaming or recording a stunt. The officiant herself carried a small card with a code word that only Ethan and I knew, and unless that word was spoken into the microphone, no unscheduled speaker would be given audio clearance, which meant that even if someone tried to push past Riley or beg for just a minute, the sound system would not betray us. By this point, my parents were beginning to realize that my strategy wasn't just about stubbornness or jealousy, it was about survival, because every time Jenna felt blocked, she escalated with a new tactic. When the vendors shut her down, she turned to gossip. When the gossip didn't stick, she tried to manipulate Ethan. When that failed, she went after the family sympathy, posting vague messages about being frozen out and forced to feel like an outsider, which some relatives responded to with sad emojis and words of comfort, but which never reached me directly because by then I had trained myself to step back from anything that came without a name attached. It was around this time that Jenna began hinting on her own social media that she would reveal the baby's name, when the whole family was finally gathered, which every relative read as a promise to hijack my wedding reception. And suddenly I found myself fielding nervous questions from people who admitted they didn't want to watch another event collapse into one of her announcements. Instead of promising that it would never happen, I told them, calmly and firmly, that safeguards were in place and that the wedding would run as planned no matter what attempts were made to derail it. Saying those words out loud to people who expected me to crumble made me realize how much ground I had gained in the months since the engagement party, because I was no longer the sister scrambling to defend herself. I was the woman designing a structure that made respect non-negotiable. Still, I knew Jenna would not walk quietly into irrelevance, so I prepared one more card to play, a move that was less about defense and more about redirecting attention at the exact moment she would expect to seize it. In the printed program for the reception, placed discreetly at every seat, I included a line under toasts that read, Announcements will be celebrated at future family events, so tonight remains dedicated to the couple. The phrasing sounded warm, almost celebratory, but in practice, it was a lock on the one door she most loved to push open. To enforce it, Riley arranged for a small security presence at the venue, not in uniforms that would embarrass anyone, but in suits that allowed them to blend with staff. With a single instruction that if anyone tried to grab a microphone or stage an unscheduled reveal, they were to be gently escorted back to their seat without discussion. The effect of all these measures wasn't just practical, it was psychological. By the time the wedding approached, the family understood that the weekend was running on rails and that deviations would not be entertained, and even those who might have sympathized with Jenna began to realize that my calm, structured approach was not only fair but necessary. They had seen enough of her games to know that without firm boundaries, she would turn every hour into a spectacle, and while they didn't say it out loud, I could tell from their quieter tone and their cautious glances that they were secretly relieved someone had finally stepped in to enforce what they had always wished for but never dared to impose. So when Jenna posted a cryptic story saying she had something unforgettable planned for the family's big weekend, the reaction was not a wave of anticipation but a ripple of unease, and I sat with Ethan in our kitchen that night and told him, "Let her try. The structure will hold." He nodded, poured me another glass of water, and said, "Then she's already lost." Hearing him say that didn't just calm me, it reminded me of the difference between chaos and design, because for the first time in my life with Jenna, I was not waiting to see how bad the damage would be, I was waiting to watch the system hold firm when tested. And that is why when the week of the wedding finally arrived, I wasn't carrying fear the way I used to, I was carrying quiet confidence, because every move she made had been anticipated, every loophole sealed, and every potential audience already prepared to see through the performance. The only thing left was the moment of truth itself, when Jenna would inevitably make her final attempt and discover that this time, she wasn't walking into a stage, but into a wall she could not break. The morning of the wedding arrived with a calm that felt almost unnatural after the months of maneuvering, contracts, coded RSVPs, and constant vigilance against my sister's attempts to turn every family milestone into a one-woman performance. And while part of me expected to wake up anxious about what she might try, I realized as I sat with my coffee that the difference this time was not whether she would make a move, but whether it would matter, because every door she might push had already been bolted shut. Every microphone she might grab had already been silenced, and every sympathetic ear she might bend had already been gently reoriented by the clarity of structure that had been laid out from the start. Ethan looked at me across the table and said, "It's going to be a good day, not because nothing will happen, but because whatever does happen won't change the outcome," and I understood immediately that he was right. Because the true power in this moment came not from preventing drama, but from making it irrelevant. The ceremony was scheduled slightly earlier than printed on the program, a quiet adjustment Riley had insisted upon as a safeguard, because she knew that Jenna's habit of making grand entrances relied on precise timing. And by the time Jenna walked into the building, expecting to position herself for maximum visibility, the procession had already begun. The music was in full swing, and the focus of the entire room was locked on the vows that Linda, our officiant, was guiding us through with calm authority. Phones were sealed in pouches, microphones were on controlled access, and the ceremony unfolded exactly as planned. So while Jenna slid into a seat with visible frustration on her face, there was no opportunity for her to stage the kind of interruption she had hinted at online, and when Ethan and I exchanged vows without even a whisper of disruption, I knew that the battle I had been fighting for months had already been won in principle, because the stage she counted on had never materialized. The reception, however, was where the true test waited, because receptions are loose, unstructured by nature, and if there was ever a place for her to try to reclaim the spotlight, this was it. As Ethan and I entered the hall for our first dance, I saw her stand near the edge of the floor, waiting for a pause she could slip into, and I caught the look in her eye that I had seen at so many birthdays and holidays before. That glint that said she was about to claim a microphone and declare something that would erase the original purpose of the gathering. But this time, the plan was already working in silence. DJ Marco had locked the audio channels. Riley stood near the booth with a list of approved names, and two discreet security staff lingered just close enough to intervene if needed. After the toasts from the wedding party and our parents, Jenna finally made her move, rising from her chair with a forced smile, holding up her glass as if it were the most natural gesture in the world, and announcing loudly, "I have something to share too." But before she could take more than 2 steps toward the DJ, one of the staff members placed a gentle hand on her arm and whispered something none of us could hear, guiding her back to her chair with practiced politeness. No scene was made, no voices were raised, and within seconds the focus of the room had shifted back to the head table as if nothing had happened. The beauty of it was that her attempt did not create drama, it disappeared into silence, leaving her not as a star but as a guest among many, which was the position she had always refused to accept. Still, I wanted to close the loop in a way that left no doubt about whose moment this was and why boundaries had been necessary. So after Ethan and I finished our dance, I took the microphone myself, thanked everyone for being there, and then added one deliberate line. In just a few weeks, we will all be gathering again to celebrate Jenna's baby shower. Hosted by Mom at a beautiful venue that's already reserved, and I know you'll join me in making that a day where she is the star. But tonight is for our wedding, and I can't tell you how much it means that you're here focusing on us. The applause that followed was not just polite, it was relieved, because everyone in the room understood what had just happened. I had taken the wind out of Jenna's sails by publicly giving her the attention she craved, but on my terms, at the right time, and in a way that left no space for hijacking. From that point forward, the evening unfolded exactly as we had hoped. There were no further attempts to interrupt, no sudden speeches, no spectacles staged in the corner of the room. People danced, laughed, ate, and celebrated us, and while Jenna sat at her table with a tight expression that betrayed how much she hated being sidelined, she no longer had the tools to flip the night in her favor. The plan had worked, not because it humiliated her, but because it left her with no stage to stand on, and the family, who had been conditioned for years to tiptoe around her disruptions, finally experienced what it was like to enjoy an event without the constant fear of being upstaged. The next day, Jenna sent me a long text filled with accusations that I had iced her out, that I had turned people against her, that I had made her feel invisible at a time when she needed support the most. I read the message carefully, then replied with one sentence: "Separate lanes mean we both get to win." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't an argument, it was the truth, and it was the only answer she was going to get from me. When I look back now, I realize that what I gained wasn't just a wedding free from sabotage, it was the proof that boundaries enforced with calm resolve can rewrite the entire dynamic of a family that had been hostage to one person's need for attention. I didn't win by shouting louder or humiliating her publicly. I won by designing a structure where her usual tactics simply could not function, and in doing so, I gave myself the gift of peace as I stepped into my marriage. Would you have gone this far, or would you have hoped for the best and trusted people to change on their own? Because for me, the lesson was clear. Change doesn't come from waiting, it comes from deciding what you will no longer accept, and then building a system that makes it impossible for those old patterns to return. I walked away from that wedding not just as a wife, but as a woman who had finally turned the tables, and I knew that while Jenna might never forgive me for refusing to play her game, I would never again lose sleep wondering whether she would hijack another milestone. The game was over, and this time, I had won.